In the quiet village of St. Mary Mead, a charming stranger, Mr. Harrow, was poisoned at a grand party, and everyone's a suspect: his nervous widow friend, Clara, angry nephew Thomas, know-it-all Dr. Grayson, and calm housekeeper, Mrs. Ellis. A forged letter, a greasy teacup, and a secret package point to a clever killer who thinks they've fooled everyone. But Miss Jane Marple, with her sharp eyes and knitting needles, sees through the lies. She sets a trap, unravels a hidden grudge, and catches Mrs. Ellis, who poisoned Mr. Harrow for revenge. In this cozy mystery, no secret escapes Miss Marple's quiet wisdom, proving the murderer never stood a chance. Chapter 1. The Village Buzzes. Mary Mead was a sleepy little village, tucked away in the green hills of England. Its narrow lanes wound past neat cottages, their gardens bursting with roses and daisies. The church steeple poked above the rooftops, and the air smelled of fresh bread from Mrs. Baker's shop. Everyone knew everyone else's business, and that was just how they liked it. Gossip was the village's favorite pastime, and today it was buzzing louder than a beehive. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cozy parlor, her knitting needles clicking softly. Her small house on High Street was as tidy as a pin, with lace curtains and a polished tea tray on the table. She was an old lady with snowy white hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. People thought she was just a sweet spinster who liked to knit, but Miss Marple had a knack for noticing things others ignored. A glance, a word, a tiny clue could unravel a whole mystery in her clever mind. This morning, she was knitting a pink scarf for her niece's baby, but her ears were tuned to the chatter outside. Through her open window, she heard footsteps crunching on the gravel path. It was Mrs. Price, the postmistress, talking to young Sally from the tea shop. Their voices carried on the warm breeze. "Did you see him, Sally?" Mrs. Price said, her voice high with excitement. "That new fellow, Mr. Harrow, moving into Willow Manor, drove up in a shiny black car. He did, with suitcases piled high." Sally giggled. "Oh, he's handsome, isn't he? All polished, like a film star. But Molly at the shop says he's got secrets. Nobody knows where his money comes from." Miss Marple's needles paused. Willow Manor had stood empty for years, its tall chimneys looming over the village. The old owner, cranky Mr. Withers, had died without family, and the house had fallen quiet. Now, a stranger had bought it, Mr. Reginald Harrow. The village was curious, and curiosity, Miss Marple knew, often hid a grain of truth. She set her knitting down and sipped her tea. A new face in St. Mary Mead was big news. People didn't just move here without a reason. She remembered old Mrs. Clement, who'd come to hide a scandal, and young Tommy, who'd turned out to be a thief. Strangers brought stories, and Miss Marple was good at guessing what they hid. By noon, she decided to take a stroll. She put on her straw hat, grabbed her walking stick, and stepped into the sunshine. The village was lively today. Children played by the duck pond, and Mr. Green, the butcher, was sweeping his shop's steps. Miss Marple nodded to him, her smile polite but her eyes sharp. She headed to the tea shop, a little place called the Blue Kettle, where gossip flowed like the tea dot inside. The air smelled of scones and jam. The tables were full, and voices hummed. Miss Marple slipped into a corner seat, her usual spot by the window. Sally, the waitress, hurried over with a pot of Earl Grey and a plate of biscuits. "Morning, Miss Marple," Sally said, her cheeks pink. "Heard about Mr. Harrow. Everyone's talking about him." Miss Marple smiled. "I've heard a whisper or two. What's the village saying, dear?" Sally leaned in, her eyes wide. "Well, he's rich, that's for sure. Molly saw him unpacking crates of fancy books and paintings. And Mrs. Ellisu, no, the housekeeper he hired, says he's got a safe in his study, locked tight. Nobody knows what's in it." Miss Marple nodded, crumbling a biscuit. "A safe, you say? Interesting. And what's Mr. Harrow like?" "Charming," Sally said. "He came in yesterday, bought tea for everyone, but he's mysterious, doesn't talk about himself, just smiles and changes the subject. Molly thinks he's hiding something, maybe a broken heart or a shady deal." Miss Marple chuckled softly. Young people loved drama, but she knew secrets weren't always so romantic. A locked safe could mean money troubles, old grudges, or something darker. She sipped her tea, listening as Sally chattered on. Mrs. Bantry's throwing a party to welcome him, Sally added, at the manor. Tomorrow night, everyone's invited: the vicar, Dr. Grayson, even Clara, that widow who lives by the mill. Oh, it'll be grand. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. A party was the perfect place to watch people. Faces lit up with wine and laughter often let secrets slip. She'd known Mrs. Bantry, her old friend, to host such evenings, and they always stirred up something. Once, at a Bantry party, a guest had let slip a clue about a stolen necklace, and Miss Marple had pieced it together by morning. "Thank you, Sally," she said, patting the girl's hand. "I'll have to pop by the manor and say hello to this Mr. Harrow myself." As Sally bustled off, Miss Marple gazed out the window. Across the street, she saw Clara, the young widow, hurrying past with a basket. Clara's face was pale, her eyes darting. She'd lost her husband 2 years ago, and the village pitied her. But Miss Marple wondered. Clara had been seen talking to Mr. Harrow yesterday, her voice sharp. Was it just neighborly chatter, or something more? The door jingled, and Mrs. Bantry swept in, her hat feathers bobbing. She was a cheerful woman, fond of bright dresses and big plans. She spotted Miss Marple and plopped into the chair across from her. "Jane, you old fox," Mrs. Bantry said, grinning. "I bet you've already heard about our new neighbor. What do you make of him?" Miss Marple smiled. "I've heard he's charming, Dolly. But charm can hide a lot, can't it?" Mrs. Bantry laughed. "Oh, you're suspicious already. He's just a businessman, Jane. Made a fortune in London, they say. I'm throwing a party tomorrow to welcome him. You must come. The whole village will be there, sniffing out his story." "I wouldn't miss it," Miss Marple said. "A new face always brings a tale or two." Mrs. Bantry leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Between you and me, I heard a rumor. My maid says Mr. Harrow's got a nephew, Thomas, who's cross with him. Something about an inheritance. And that housekeeper, Mrs. Ellis, she's worked for shady types before. I wouldn't trust her with my silver." Miss Marple's needles clicked in her mind, though her hands were still. An angry nephew, a secretive housekeeper, a rich man with a locked safe already. The pieces of a puzzle were forming. She thought of old Mr. Jenkins, a village miser who'd been cheated by a relative years ago. The same greed, the same lies, always cropped up. "Dolly," she said, "people bring their troubles with them, don't they? Like baggage they can't unpack." Mrs. Bantry nodded. "You're right, Jane. But Mr. Harrow seems nice enough. Maybe he's just here for a quiet life." "Maybe," Miss Marple said, but her eyes said she doubted it. That afternoon, Miss Marple walked to Willow Manor. The house stood at the edge of the village, its stone walls covered in ivy. The windows gleamed, and the garden was freshly trimmed. Mr. Harrow had been busy. As she passed the gate, she saw a man step out, a tall figure in a smart suit, with dark hair and a quick smile. "Mr. Harrow, no doubt. Good afternoon," he called, waving. His voice was smooth, like honey. "You must be Miss Marple. Mrs. Bantry mentioned you." Miss Marple nodded, her smile polite. "Mr. Harrow, I presume. Welcome to St. Mary Mead." "Thank you," he said, his eyes twinkling. "It's a charming place. I hope to settle in quietly." He was polite, but Miss Marple noticed his hands clenched tight, then quickly relaxed. A nervous habit, perhaps. She thought of young Tommy, the thief, who'd smiled just as brightly before he was caught. "I'm sure you will," she said. "Mrs. Bantry's party should help you meet everyone." "Oh yes," Mr. Harrow said. "I'm looking forward to it. Good day, Miss Marple." He tipped his hat and turned back to the manor. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind busy. He was charming, yes, but charm was a mask. She'd seen it before, people who smiled while hiding dark secrets. As she walked home, the village seemed peaceful, but Miss Marple knew better. Trouble was brewing, like a storm behind clear skies. She thought of the party tomorrow, where wine would loosen tongues and secrets might spill. She'd be there, watching, listening, her sharp eyes catching what others missed. Back in her parlor, she picked up her knitting, The pink scarf grew longer, stitch by stitch. Outside the village hummed with gossip about Mr. Harrow's money, his mystery, his locked safe. Miss Marple smiled to herself. People thought they could hide things, but not from her. She'd seen too many lies, too many masks, in St. Mary Mead. Tomorrow, at the party, she'd start piecing the puzzle together. Someone, somewhere, was hiding something. And Miss Marple, with her quiet ways and sharp mind, would find it. Chapter 2. An unexpected death. The sun dipped low over St. Mary Mead, painting the sky pink and gold. Willow Manor glowed in the evening light, its windows sparkling like jewels. Tonight was Mrs. Bantry's party to welcome Mr. Reginald Harrow, and the village was alive with excitement. Carriages and bicycles lined the lane, and laughter spilled from the manor's open doors. Miss Jane Marple, dressed in her best black dress and a neat hat, walked up the gravel path, her walking stick tapping softly. Her eyes, sharp as ever, scanned the crowd. A party was a fine place for secrets to slip, and she was ready to listen. Inside, the manor's hall was grand, with polished wood floors and a chandelier twinkling above. Tables held plates of sandwiches, cakes, and gleaming glasses of wine. Mrs. Bantry, in a bright red dress, fluttered about, greeting guests. Mr. Harrow stood by the fireplace, shaking hands and smiling. His dark suit was crisp, his hair slicked back, but Miss Marple noticed his eyes starting, like a man watching his back. She slipped into a corner, holding a glass of lemonade. The room buzzed with chatter. The vicar, Mr. Clement, talked loudly about his sermon. Dr. Grayson, the village doctor, sipped wine and frowned at the crowd. Clara, the young widow, stood near a window, her face pale and her hands twisting her shawl. And Mrs. Ellis, Mr. Harrow's housekeeper, moved quietly, refilling trays. Miss Marple watched them all, her mind as busy as her knitting needles. Mrs. Bantry hurried over, her cheeks flushed. "Jane, isn't it lovely? Mr. Harrow's such a charmer. Look at him, winning everyone over." Miss Marple smiled. "He's certainly popular, Dolly. Quite a turnout." "Oh yes," Mrs. Bantry said. "Even Thomas, his nephew, came, though he's sulking in the corner. Family trouble, I hear. And Clara's been odd all night, barely said a word." Miss Marple glanced at Thomas, a lanky young man with a scowl, leaning against a wall. He looked angry, his eyes fixed on Mr. Harrow. Clara, meanwhile, kept glancing at the door, as if she wanted to run. Miss Marple filed these details away. Like stitches in a pattern. Mr. Harrow raised his glass, his voice cutting through the noise. "Friends, thank you for this warm welcome," he said. "St. Mary Mead is my new home, and I hope to make many friends here, to new beginnings." The crowd cheered, clinking glasses. Miss Marple sipped her lemonade, watching Mr. Harrow smile. It was bright, but his hand shook slightly. Nervous, she thought, or afraid. The party rolled on. Music played, and people danced. Miss Marple stayed in her corner, listening to snatches of talk. She heard Sally, the tea-shop girl, whisper to a friend about Mr. Harrow's locked safe. "Mrs. Ellis says it's full of gold." Sally giggled. Across the room, Dr. Grayson muttered to the vicar about shady business in London. Miss Marple's ears pricked up. Gossip wasn't always true, but it often held a spark of something real. Then, a sharp cry cut through the music. The room fell silent. Mrs. Ellis stood by the study door, her face white. "Mr. Harrow," she gasped. He's not moving." The crowd surged toward the study. Miss Marple followed, her heart quickening. The study was a small room with bookshelves, a desk, and a single lamp casting shadows. Mr. Harrow lay slumped in an armchair, his glass spilled on the rug. His face was gray, his eyes staring blankly. A bitter smell hung in the air, like burnt almonds. Dr. Grayson pushed through, kneeling by the body. He checked Mr. Harrow's pulse, then shook his head. "He's dead," he said grimly. "Poison, I'd wager. That smells cyanide, maybe." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Bantry clutched her pearls. "Poison, at my party. Oh heavens." Clara swayed, grabbing the doorframe. Thomas stared, his face pale but his eyes hard. Mrs. Ellis wrung her hands, muttering, "I only brought him tea, just tea." Miss Marple's eyes darted around the room. The teacup sat on the desk, half empty. A window was cracked open, letting in a cool breeze. A single paper lay on the floor, crumpled, as if dropped in a hurry. She stepped closer, peering at the cup. A faint stain marked its rim, not quite tea-colored. Curious, she thought. Inspector Craddock arrived within the hour, his boots heavy on the manor's floor. He was a solid man, with a kind face but sharp eyes, used to Miss Marple helping village mysteries. He sealed off the study and began questioning guests. The party had ended, and people huddled in the hall, whispering. Miss Marple sat with Mrs. Bantry, who was fanning herself. "Jane, this is awful. Poisoned, right under our noses. Who'd do such a thing?" "Someone clever," Miss Marple said, softly. "Someone who thought they could slip away, unnoticed." Inspector Craddock joined them, his notebook out. "Miss Marple, any thoughts?" "You've got a knack for these things." She smiled faintly. "It's early, Inspector. But poison is personal. Someone knew Mr. Harrow's habits when he'd drink, where he'd sit. Look at that teacup, and the paper on the floor. Small things, but they matter." Craddock nodded, jotting notes. He turned to the crowd. "Nobody leaves until I've spoken to you. Who saw Mr. Harrow last?" Mrs. Ellis stepped forward, her voice shaky. "I brought him tea at 8, sir. He was fine, reading in the study. I left him alone." Clara spoke up, her voice thin. "I saw him at 7:30. We talked. He was upset, said something about a letter. Then I went back to the party." Thomas shrugged, his tone cold. "I didn't talk to him. Haven't in months. He cut me out of his will, you know. Didn't care for him much." Dr. Grayson frowned. "I passed the study around 8. Heard voices Harrow and someone else arguing. Couldn't make out who." Miss Marple listened, her mind turning. An argument, a letter, a teacup with a strange stain. She thought of old Mrs. Finch, a village woman who'd poisoned her husband years ago. The signs were the same: careful planning, a calm face hiding guilt. But who here had that calm? Inspector Craddock questioned more guests, but nobody admitted to seeing anything odd. The vicar babbled about peace and forgiveness. Sally said she'd been serving cakes all night. The room felt heavy with fear and suspicion. Miss Marple slipped into the study while Craddock was busy. She didn't touch anything, but looked closely. The teacup's stain was faint, almost greasy. The crumpled paper was a letter, half torn, with the words, "You'll pay," scrawled in rough ink. She didn't pick it up. She knew better, but she memorized its look. The window's latch was loose, as if someone had climbed out, or in. Back in the hall, she watched the suspects. Mrs. Ellis was tidying plates, her hand steady now. Too steady, Miss Marple thought. Clara kept her eyes down, twisting her shawl. Thomas slouched, but his jaw was tight, like he was holding back. Dr. Grayson paced, muttering about cyanide speed. Each had a chance to slip poison into that tea, but who had the reason? Mrs. Bantry grabbed her arm. "Jane, this is like one of your puzzles. You'll figure it out, won't you?" "I'll try, Dolly," Miss Marple said. "People think they can hide things, but they leave traces. Always." Inspector Craddock called her over. "Found something, Miss Marple. You've got that look." She pointed to the study. "The teacup, Inspector. Check it for poison. And that letter, someone's angry. Maybe too angry." Craddock nodded. "We'll test the cup. The letter's odd, looks like a threat. Could be a clue, or someone's trick." Miss Marple agreed. A trick was possible. She'd seen it before, clever killer planting false clues to point fingers elsewhere. Like young Tommy, who'd left a stolen watch in a neighbor's shed to shift blame. As the guests were sent home, Miss Marple lingered. She watched Mrs. Ellis lock the manor's doors, her face blank. Clara hurried off, nearly running. Thomas lit a cigarette, his hand shaking. Dr. Grayson offered to help the police, but his eyes kept flicking to the study. Miss Marple walked home under the stars, her stick tapping the path. The village was quiet now, but her mind was loud. Poison was quick, silent, cruel. Someone at that party had planned it, thinking they'd fooled everyone. But they hadn't fooled her. Not yet. Back in her parlor, she sat by the fire, her knitting untouched. She thought of the teacup, the letter, the open window. Small things, but they told a story. She remembered a village girl, years ago, who'd hidden poison in a cake. The trick was in the timing, the trust. Mr. Harrow had trusted someone close. Tomorrow, she'd visit the manor again. Mrs. Bantry would invite her, eager for gossip. Miss Marple would watch, listen, and wait. The murderer thought they were safe, but they didn't know her. They didn't know how her quiet eyes saw everything. Chapter 3. The Clever Disguise. The morning after Mr. Harrow's death, St. Mary Mead was as quiet as a held breath. The sun shone, birds chirped, but the village felt heavy, like a storm was coming. Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlor, her knitting, needle still, her sharp blue eyes gazing out the window. The pink scarf for her niece's baby lay untouched in her lap. Her mind was busy, piecing together the puzzle from last night's awful scene at Willow Manor. A man was dead. Someone at that party thought they'd pulled off the perfect crime. Miss Marple knew better. Nobody was perfect, and every lie left a trace. She sipped her tea, thinking about the teacup in Mr. Harrow's study, its strange stain, and the crumpled letter with "You'll pay" scrawled on it. She thought of the open window, the bitter smell of poison, and the faces of the guests. Clara's nervous eyes, Thomas's scowl, Mrs. Ellis's calm hands, Dr. Grayson's quick glances. Someone was hiding something, and Miss Marple was determined to find out who. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. It was Mrs. Bantry, her hat askew, her face pink with excitement. "Jane, you must come to the manor," she said, bustling in. "Inspector Craddock's there, poking around, and everyone's talking. They found something, a letter. Oh, it's dreadful." Miss Marple set her tea down. "A letter, Dolly. The one from the study." Mrs. Bantry nodded, her eyes wide. "Yes, it's a threat, Jane. Signed by Thomas, Mr. Harrow's nephew. Says he'd make his uncle pay for cutting him out of the will. Craddock thinks Thomas did it." Miss Marple's lips pursed. "Interesting, but a signed letter seems too neat, don't you think?" Mrs. Bantry blinked. "Neat? You mean it's a trick?" "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, standing. "Let's go to the manor. I'd like to see this letter myself." She grabbed her hat and stick, and the two women walked to Willow Manor. The village was buzzing. At the butcher's, Mr. Green whispered to a customer about poison. By the duck pond, children giggled over wild stories of murder. Miss Marple listened, her ears catching every word. Gossip wasn't always true, but it often pointed to the truth, like a crooked signpost dot at the manor. The grand hall was quiet now, no music or laughter. Inspector Craddock stood by the study door, talking to a young policeman. Mrs. Ellis, the housekeeper, was sweeping the floor, her face blank. Clara, the widow, sat on a bench, twisting her shawl. Thomas slouched nearby, his hands in his pockets, his eyes angry. Dr. Grayson was there too, offering to help Craddock, but his voice was sharp, like he was nervous. Miss Marple nodded to Craddock. "Good morning, Inspector. I hear you've found a letter." He tipped his hat. "Morning, Miss Marple. Yes, a nasty one. Found it in the study, crumpled by Mr. Harrow's chair. It's got Thomas's name on it, threatening his uncle. Looks bad for him. May I see it?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. Craddock hesitated, then handed her the letter, sealed in a clear bag. Miss Marple held it up to the light. The handwriting was rough, the words sharp. "You'll pay for cheating me, Uncle. I'll get what's mine." It was signed Thomas. She studied the paper cheap, torn at the edge, the ink smudged. Something about it felt wrong, like a play put on for show. "Very clear," she said, handing it back. "Almost too clear." Craddock raised an eyebrow. "You think it's planted?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "I think someone wants us to look at Thomas. But I wonder what else we're not seeing." She glanced at the suspects. Thomas glared at the floor, muttering about his uncle's greed. Clara's hands shook as she sipped water. Mrs. Ellis swept slowly, her eyes darting to the study. Dr. Grayson adjusted his glasses, watching everyone. Miss Marple's mind turned. A clever murderer would point fingers away from themselves. This letter was a bright arrow aimed at Thomas, but was it too bright? Mrs. Bantry tugged her arm. Jane, come to the kitchen. Mrs. Ellis made tea, and Clara's telling me about her talk with Mr. Harrow last night. You should hear it. In the kitchen, Clara sat at a wooden table, her face pale. Mrs. Ellis poured tea, her hands steady as stone. Miss Marple took a cup, her eyes on the housekeeper. Mrs. Ellis was too calm, she thought, like someone hiding a storm inside. Clara, dear, Miss Marple said. Mrs. Bantry says you spoke to Mr. Harrow last night. What was he like? Clara's eyes flicked up, then down. He was upset, said someone was after his money. He mentioned a letter, but not what it said. I told him to be careful. Then I left. That was all. Miss Marple nodded. And you didn't see him again? No, Clara said quickly. I was with the guests after that. Mrs. Ellis set the teapot down. Poor Mr. Harrow, she said, her voice flat. I brought him tea at 8, like always. He was reading, seemed fine. I never thought. Miss Marple watched her. You brought his tea, Mrs. Ellis. From this kitchen? Yes, Mrs. Ellis said. Same as every night. He liked it strong, with sugar. Miss Marple glanced at the teapot. It was plain, white, with a tiny chip on the spout. She remembered the teacup in the study. Its odd stain. Did you use that teapot? She asked. Mrs. Ellis nodded. Always do. Miss Marple filed that away. A teapot used every night meant someone knew Mr. Harrow's habits. Poison in a cup was easy if you poured the tea. Back in the hall, Craddock was questioning Thomas. This letter's got your name, lad, he said. Care to explain? Thomas's face reddened. It's not mine. I didn't write it. Sure, I was mad at my uncle. He cut me out of his will for no reason. But I didn't kill him. Where were you at 8? Craddock asked. At the pub, Thomas said. Ask the barman. I was there till 9. Miss Marple listened, her mind ticking. Thomas had an alibi, but alibis could be faked. She thought of a village boy, years ago, who'd paid a friend to lie about his whereabouts. She looked at Clara, who was staring at her hands, then at Mrs. Ellis, who'd gone back to sweeping. Dr. Grayson stood nearby, offering Craddock a list of poisons. Cyanide's quick, he said. Kills in minutes. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Dr. Grayson knew poisons too well, perhaps, but Mrs. Ellis knew Mr. Harrow's tea routine. Clara had argued with him. Thomas had a motive. Each could have slipped poison into that cup, but the letter screamed Thomas too loudly. A clever disguise, she thought. Like a bright scarf, hiding a stain. She stepped into the study, where Craddock allowed her to look around. The teacup was gone, taken for testing, but the room still held clues. The window's latch was loose, the curtain slightly torn, as if caught by someone climbing through. The desk had papers scattered, but one caught her Aja receipt for a London chemist, dated last week. For what? She wondered. She thought of old Mrs. Finch, the poisoner, from years back. Mrs. Finch had been clever, hiding her crime behind a sweet smile and a fake letter blaming someone else. This felt the same a trap set to fool everyone. Miss Marple's lips curved. The murderer thought they'd outsmarted her, but they didn't know how well she saw through tricks. Outside, she found Mrs. Bantry by the garden. Jane, what do you think? Is Thomas guilty? Miss Marple shook her head. The letters to Perfect Dolly. Someone wants us to think it's Thomas. But I'm watching them, all Clara, Mrs. Ellis, even Dr. Grayson. Someone's playing a game. Mrs. Bantry gasped. A game? You mean they're laughing at us? Not for long, Miss Marple said. People who lie always slip up. A word, a look, a tiny mistake. I'll find it. As they walked back to the village, Miss Marple thought of the teapot, the letter, the window. Each was a thread in a tangle, and she'd pull them loose. She remembered a village girl who'd hidden a stolen ring in a teapot, thinking no one would look. But Miss Marple had looked, and she'd look now at home. She sat by her fire, her knitting still untouched. The village was quiet, but the murderer was out there, thinking they'd won. They'd planned their disguise, wealth a letter, the alibis, the poison. But Miss Marple's eyes were sharper than they knew. She'd watch, listen, and wait. The truth was like a dropped stitch maul, but it unraveled everything. Chapter 4. Miss Marple's Observations. The sun climbed higher over St. Mary Mead, casting golden light on the village's tidy cottages and blooming gardens. But the warmth couldn't chase away the chill of Mr. Harrow's death. The village whispered about poison, a threatening letter, and a murderer hiding among them. Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlor, her knitting needles quiet, her sharp blue eyes thoughtful. The pink scarf for her niece's baby lay in a basket, untouched since the party. Her mind was too busy sorting the clues from Willow Manor: teacups, odd stain, the forged letter pointing at Thomas, the loose window latch, and the chemist's receipt. Someone thought they'd fooled everyone, but Miss Marple knew better. Secrets always left tracks, like footprints in a garden. A knock at the door stirred her. It was Mrs. Bantry, her cheeks pink, her hat feathers bobbing. "Jane, you must come to the manor," she said, her voice a mix of worry and excitement. "Clara's in a state, crying her eyes out. She asked for you, says she needs a friend. And Inspector Craddock's still there, sniffing around. Oh, it's all so dreadful." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "I'll come, Dolly. A visit might clear things up." She grabbed her straw hat and walking stick, her steps light but her mind heavy with questions. Clara's tears could be real or a show. Miss Marple had seen both before, like when young Mary in the village wept over a stolen brooch she'd hidden herself. People's faces lied, but their actions spoke louder. The walk to Willow Manor was quiet, the village holding its breath. At the butcher's, Mr. Green muttered about Thomas's temper. By the tea shop, Sally whispered to a customer about Mrs. Ellis's strange calm. Miss Marple listened, her ears sharp as her eyes. Gossip was like a breeze, it carried bits of truth, even if muddled. At the manor, the grand hall felt cold, the party's cheer long gone. Clara sat on a velvet sofa, her face buried in a handkerchief. Mrs. Ellis moved silently, dusting a shelf, her eyes darting to the study door. Inspector Craddock stood nearby, talking to Dr. Grayson, who was explaining cyanide's effects again, his voice too loud. Thomas was gone. Craddock had let him go to the pub to check his alibi. Miss Marple noted it all, her mind like a notebook. Mrs. Bantry led her to Clara. "Jane, thank goodness. Clara's been asking for you." Clara looked up, her eyes red. "Oh, Miss Marple," she whispered, "I'm so frightened. Everyone thinks I had something to do with it, but I didn't, I swear." Miss Marple sat beside her, patting her hand. "There, dear. Tell me what's troubling you." Clara sniffled. "I argued with Mr. Harrow that night. He wanted me to invest in some business deal. I said no, and he got angry. People heard us, and now they think I poisoned him." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gentle but sharp. "What kind of deal, Clara?" "Something about property in London," Clara said. "He said it'd make me rich, but I didn't trust him. He was pushy, not like his usual charm." Miss Marple filed that away. A pushy Mr. Harrow didn't match his smooth smile. She thought of old Mr. Jenkins, who'd conned a neighbor with a fake land deal. Money made people desperate or dangerous. Mrs. Ellis brought tea, setting a tray on the table. The teapot was the same one from last night, chipped spout and all. Miss Marple watched her pour, noting the housekeeper's steady hands. Too steady, she thought, for someone whose master had just died. "Thank you, Mrs. Ellis," Miss Marple said. "You must be shaken with all this happening." Mrs. Ellis's face stayed blank. "It's a shock, Miss, but I keep busy." "Mr. Harrow liked things tidy, did he?" Miss Marple asked. "You knew his habits well, I suppose. His tea, his routine." "Oh yes," Mrs. Ellis said. "Tea at 8 every night, strong with sugar. He was particular." Miss Marple smiled. "And you always used that teapot?" Mrs. Ellis nodded, then turned back to her dusting. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the teapot. The stain on the study's teacup had been greasy, not like tea. Poison could be mixed in a patora, a cup if you knew when someone would drink. She glanced at Clara, who was sipping tea, her hands trembling. Clara's story about the business deal was odd. Why would Mr. Harrow push a widow for money? Miss Marple thought of a village woman, years ago, who'd lied about a debt to hide a bigger secret. Clara's tears seemed real, but tears were easy to fake. Dr. Grayson approached, his glasses glinting. Miss Marple, terrible business, isn't it? Cyanide's a nasty thing quick, but not painless. Whoever used it was bold. Bold indeed, Miss Marple said. You know a lot about poisons. Dr. Mead shrugged, his smile tight. Part of the job. I've seen poisoning cases before. Rare, but they happen. Miss Marple nodded, her mind ticking. Dr. Grayson's knowledge was used for lore suspicious. She remembered a village chemist who'd mixed a deadly dose, claiming it was an accident. Knowledge could be a weapon. Inspector Craddock joined them, his notebook full. Miss Marple, the teacups being tested. Early results show cyanide mixed in the tea, and that letter Thomas swears it's not his writing. We're checking it against his letters. Good, Miss Marple said. Handwriting tells a story, Inspector. So does a teapot. Craddock raised an eyebrow. The teapot. You think it's important? Everything's important, she said. A chipped spout, a greasy stain, a loose latch. Small things add up. She asked to see the study again. Craddock let her in, and she moved carefully, her eyes scanning. The window's torn curtain caught her attention. It was snagged on a nail, as if someone had climbed through in a hurry. The desk held more papers, bills, a map of London properties, and that chemist's receipt, dated last week. She didn't touch it but noted the shop's name, Harrington's, in London. For what? Medicine, or something worse. The letter's words echoed in her mind. You'll pay. It was too perfect, pointing straight at Thomas. She thought of a village boy who'd forged a note to blame a rival. The trick was in the details: smudged ink, cheap paper. This letter felt staged, like a prop in a play. Back in the hall, she watched the others. Mrs. Ellis was polishing a mirror, her reflection calm, but her eyes sharp. Clara twisted her shawl, glancing at the door. Dr. Grayson talked to Craddock, his hands moving fast, like he was nervous. Each had a chance to slip poison into Mr. Harrow's tea, but who had the reason? Mrs. Bantry pulled her aside. Jane, Clara's a wreck, but I don't know if I believe her. And Mrs. Ellis, she's too quiet. What do you see? Miss Marple lowered her voice. I see people hiding. Dolly, Clara's scared, but is it guilt? Mrs. Ellis knows too much about that tea. Dr. Grayson knows poisons, and Thomas's letter feels like a trick. Someone's playing a clever game. Mrs. Bantry gasped. A game? You mean they're laughing at us? Not laughing, Miss Marple said. Planning. But plans go wrong. They always do. She thought of the teapot again. If poison was in the tea, someone had to pour it. Mrs. Ellis was closest, but Clara had been near the study. Dr. Grayson could have slipped in, and Thomas might have lied about the pub. The window suggested an outsider, but the tea pointed to someone inside. A clever disguise, she thought, like a mask at a village fair as they left the manor. Miss Marple glanced back. Mrs. Ellis was locking the door, her face blank. Clara hurried down the path, her shawl slipping. Dr. Grayson climbed into his car, his hands shaky. Miss Marple's mind turned, stitching clues together. She remembered a village woman who'd hidden a crime behind a calm face, thinking no one would notice, but Miss Marple noticed at home. She sat by her fire, her knitting still untouched. The village was quiet, but danger hid in its shadows. The murderer thought they'd fooled everyone with their forged letter and careful alibis, but Miss Marple's eyes were sharper than they knew. She'd seen the teapot's chip, the curtain's tear, the receipt's date. Small things, but they told a story. Tomorrow, she'd talk to Sally at the tea shop, who might have heard more gossip. She'd ask about that chemist's receipt, maybe through Mrs. Bantry's London friends. The murderer was clever, but clever. People tripped over their own tricks. Miss Marple would watch, listen, and wait. The truth was like a loose thread one tug, and the whole disguise would unravel. Chapter 5. The alibi game. The morning mist hung low over St. Mary Mead, wrapping the village in a soft gray blanket. The cottages looked sleepy, their windows glowing faintly as fires were lit inside. But the quiet hid a restless hum-talk of Mr. Harrow's murder spread like wildfire, and everyone had a theory. Miss Jane Marple sat by her parlor window, her knitting needles still, her sharp blue eyes watching the street. The pink scarf for her niece's baby lay forgotten in its basket. Her mind was too busy, turning over the clues from Willow Manor, the greasy stain on the teacup, the forged letter blaming Thomas, the torn curtain, and the chemist's receipt from London. Someone had poisoned Mr. Harrow, thinking they'd outsmarted everyone. But Miss Marple knew clever plans always left cracks, and she was good at finding them. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. It was Sally, the tea-shop girl, her apron dusted with flour, her eyes wide with news. "Miss Marple, you won't believe it," she said, stepping inside. "Inspector Craddock's been at the pub, checking Thomas's story, and Clara's been crying all morning at the shop, saying people are staring at her." Miss Marple poured Sally a cup of tea. "Sit, dear. Tell me what you've heard." Sally plopped into a chair, her voice low. "The barman says Thomas was at the pub till 9, like he said. But Molly, she works with me, saw him near the manor at 8, sneaking by the hedge. And Clara, she was in the tea shop, saying she was with guests all night, but I saw her slip away for a bit. Oh, and Mrs. Ellis, she's been acting odd, to calm, like she doesn't care Mr. Harrow's dead." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Thank you, Sally. People's stories don't always match their steps, do they?" Sally shook her head. "No, miss. And there's more. Dr. Grayson was at the shop yesterday, buying headache powders. Said he was up all night, worried about the murder. Why is he so jumpy?" Miss Marple nodded, her mind ticking. "Alibis were like patchwork quilts, pretty until you saw the loose stitches. Thomas's pub story had a hole if Molly saw him near the manor. Clara's absence from the party was curious. Mrs. Ellis's calm was too perfect. And Dr. Grayson's headache powders, could they be from that London chemist? She thought of a village boy who'd lied about being at church, caught when a neighbor saw him elsewhere. Alibis were only as good as the eyes watching. "I'm going to the tea shop later," Miss Marple said. "Keep your ears open, Sally. You hear things nobody else does." Sally grinned. "I will, miss. Everyone talks at the Blue Kettle." After Sally left, Miss Marple put on her hat and grabbed her stick. The tea shop was the heart of village gossip, and she wanted to hear more. As she walked down High Street, the village was stirring. Mr. Green, the butcher, waved from his shop, muttering about Thomas's bad temper. Two women by the duck pond whispered about Clara's tears. Miss Marple smiled politely, but her ears caught every word. Gossip was messy, but it often hid a shiny bit of truth. At the Blue Kettle, the air smelled of warm scones and strong tea. The tables were full, and voices buzzed. Miss Marple took her usual corner seat, her eyes scanning the room. Clara was there, sitting alone, her face pale, her hands twisting a napkin. Mrs. Bantry bustled in, spotting Miss Marple and hurrying over. "Jane, it's awful," Mrs. Bantry said, plopping down. "Craddock's sure Thomas did it, but I'm not so certain. That letter's to tidy, like you said, and Clarushi's falling apart. Says she's scared someone's watching her." Miss Marple glanced at Clara. "Fear can mean many things, Dolly. Guilt, or maybe just worry. What's Craddock found?" Mrs. Bantry leaned in. The teacup had cyanide mixed in the tea, and the letter's ink matches a pin from the manor. But Thomas swears he never touched it. "Oh, and they checked the pub. Thomas was there, but he left for a bit, around 8. Nobody's sure where he went." Miss Marple's lips pursed. A gap in his story. Interesting. And the other's Clara, Mrs. Ellis, Dr. Grayson. Clara says she was with guests, but Sally saw her slip away. Mrs. Bantry said Mrs. Ellis was in the kitchen, or so she says. Dr. Grayson was all over, talking to everyone. He's pushy about helping Craddock, like he wants to steer things. Miss Marple nodded. Alibis were crumbling, like a badly baked cake, she thought, of old Mrs. Finch, the village poisoner, who'd claimed she was gardening when her husband died. A neighbor's glance proved her wrong. Small moments broke big lies. She looked at Clara, who was staring out the window, her eyes darting. Miss Marple rose and walked over, her smile kind. "Clara, dear, may I sit?" Clara nodded, her voice shaky. "Oh, Miss Marple, I don't know what to do. Everyone thinks I killed him, but I didn't. I was with people all night, I swear." Miss Marple patted her hand. "Tell me, dear, you slipped away from the party, didn't you? Where did you go?" Clara's eyes widened, then dropped. I just needed air. The room was so hot. I walked in the garden, that's all." "Near the study window?" Miss Marple asked gently. Clara flushed. "No. Well, maybe close, but I didn't go in. I just walked." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes sharp. Clara's story was thin, like threadbare cloth. She thought of a village girl who'd lied about a walk to hide a meeting with a thief. Clara's nerves could be fear or guilt. Back at her table, Miss Marple sipped tea. Watching the room, Mrs. Ellis came in, carrying a basket of bread for the shop. Her face was calm, her steps steady. Too steady, Miss Marple thought. She remembered Mrs. Ellis pouring tea at the manor, her hands never shaking. A murderer needed steady hands to pour poison. Dr. Grayson entered, his glasses glinting. He nodded to Miss Marple, then sat with Mrs. Bantry, talking loudly about cyanide. "It's fast," he said. "A spoonful in tea would do it. Whoever planned this was clever." "Too clever, perhaps," Miss Marple said softly. Dr. Grayson's knowledge was useful or dangerous. She thought of that chemist's receipt. Had he bought something in London? Inspector Craddock arrived, his face tired but sharp. He joined Miss Marple, his notebook out. "Miss Marple, you've been quiet. Any thoughts on these alibis?" She smiled. "Alibis are like stories, Inspector. They sound good until you poke them." Thomas left the pub. Clara left the party. Mrs. Ellis was in the kitchen alone. Dr. Grayson was everywhere, but nobody watched him closely. Craddock nodded. "Thomas's gap bothers me. Molly saw him near the manor at 8. He says he was just walking, but it's fishy." Clara's story's shaky too. Mrs. Ellis swears she never left the kitchen, and Dr. Grayson says he was mingling. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Check the kitchen, Inspector. See if anyone saw Mrs. Ellis there at 8. And that receipt from the chemist Harrington's in London. It might tell us something." Craddock jotted a note. "You're onto something, aren't you? That teapot's been on my mind too. The cyanide was in the tea, but the pot's clean. Someone wiped it. Or used a different cup," Miss Marple said. Leland said. "The one in the study was special, perhaps." Craddock's eyes widened. "You think so?" "It's possible," she said. "A clever trick to swap cups." She thought of the greasy stain on the teacup. A swapped cup could carry poison, placed just for Mr. Harrow. She remembered a village woman who'd swapped a poisoned glass to frame her sister. The trick was in the timing. As Craddock left to check the kitchen, Miss Marple watched the suspects. Mrs. Ellis was serving tea, her face blank. Clara stared at her cup, her hands trembling. Dr. Grayson talked to a customer, his voice loud but his hands fidgety. Thomas wasn't there, but his shaky alibi hung over him like a cloud dot. Mrs. Bantry leaned over. "Jane, you're thinking hard. Who's the liar?" Miss Marple smiled. "They're all lying a little, Dolly. The trick is finding the big lie." She thought of the letter, the perfect in its blame of Thomas. The torn curtain, suggesting a sneaky exit. The receipt, hinting at poison. Each alibi had a cracked Thomas's absence. Clara's walk, Mrs. Ellis's solitude, Dr. Grayson's roaming. The murderer was playing a game, thinking they'd won. But Miss Marple saw the cracks start at home. She sat by her fire, her knitting untouched. The village was quiet, but danger lurked. The murderer's alibi was clever, but no lie was perfect. She'd find the loose thread maybe in the teapot, the receipt, or a careless glance. The game was on, and Miss Marple was ready to play. Chapter 6. Village Parallels. The afternoon sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a warm golden glow, making the village's cottages look like pictures from a storybook. Roses bloomed along fences, and the church bell chimed softly. But beneath the calm, Whispers of Mr. Harrow's murder stirred like leaves in a breeze. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cozy parlor, her knitting needles still, her sharp blue eyes fixed on the garden outside. The pink scarf for her niece's baby lay untouched in its basket. Her mind was too busy stitching together clues from Willow Manor, the greasy teacup stain, the forged letter blaming Thomas, the torn curtain, the chemist's receipt, and the shaky alibis. Someone had poisoned Mr. Harrow, thinking they'd fooled everyone. But Miss Marple knew secrets were like weeds, they always pushed through. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. It was Mrs. Bantry, her hat slightly crooked, her face alight with news. "Jane, you won't believe it," she said, stepping inside. "Inspector Craddock's been to the kitchen at the manor. Nobody saw Mrs. Ellis there at 8, like she claimed, and Clara's been telling people she saw a shadow by the study window that night. Oh, it's all so mysterious." Miss Marple poured tea from her china pot. "Sit, Dolly. A shadow, you say, and Mrs. Ellis's story has a hole. That's worth noting." Mrs. Bantry plopped into a chair, fanning herself. "Craddock's, sure it's Thomas, because of that letter. But I keep thinking about what you said, it's too neat. And Clara's so jumpy, like she's hiding something. What do you make of it?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "I'm thinking of old Mrs. Lane, Dolly. Years ago, she swore she was baking when her cousin's jewels went missing. But nobody saw her in the kitchen, and a neighbor spotted her near the garden gate. Lies are like that, they sound good until someone looks closely." Mrs. Bantry gasped. "You mean Mrs. Ellis lied about the kitchen? Or Clara about the shadow?" "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, sipping her tea. "Or both. People lie to hide big things or small ones that grow. Let's go to the tea shop. Gossip might tell us more." She grabbed her hat and stick, and the two women walked down High Street. The village was alive with chatter. By the duck pond, children whispered about a poisoner hiding in the woods. At the butcher's, Mr. Green muttered about Dr. Grayson's late-night walks. Miss Marple listened, her ears as sharp as her eyes. Gossip was like a river, it carried bits of truth, even if muddy. At the Blue Kettle, the tea shop smelled of warm scones and sweet jam. The tables were full, and voices hummed. Miss Marple took her corner seat, her eyes scanning the room. Sally, the waitress, hurried over with a pot of tea and a plate of biscuits. "Miss Marple, everyone's talking about the murder," she said, her cheeks pink. "Clara was here earlier, saying she saw a shadow outside the study. And Molly heard Mrs. Ellis arguing with Mr. Harrow last week about money." Miss Marple crumbled a biscuit. "Money, you say? What kind of argument?" Sally leaned in. "Molly says Mrs. Ellis was cross, saying Mr. Harrow owed her something. He laughed it off, but she looked mad. And Dr. Grayson's been odd being powders at the chemist, looking nervous." Miss Marple nodded. An argument about money was a strong thread. She thought of old Mr. Jenkins, who'd cheated a friend over a loan and ended up with a knife in his shed. Greed made people bold and careless. "And Thomas?" she asked. "Any news?" Sally shrugged. "He's at the pub, drinking. Says he's innocent, but people saw him near the manor that night. He's got a temper, that one." Miss Marple's mind ticked. Thomas's alibi was shaky. Clara's shadow story was new. Mrs. Ellis's kitchen claim was empty, and Dr. Powders were curious. She remembered a village girl, Lily, who'd lied about seeing a stranger to cover her own theft. Shadows and alibis were tricks, and Miss Marple knew how to spot them. Mrs. Bantry leaned over. "Jane Clara's shadow story sounds fishy. Why? Didn't she mention it before?" "Fear, perhaps," Miss Marple said. "Or a way to point fingers elsewhere. Let's visit the manor again. I'd like to see that window." They walked to Willow Manor, the sun now high. The manor's ivy-covered walls looked peaceful, but Miss Marple felt a chill. Inside, Inspector Craddock was questioning Mrs. Ellis, who stood by the kitchen door, her face blank. Clara was in the hall, twisting her shawl. Dr. Grayson was there too, offering Craddock a book on poisons, his hands fidgety. Miss Marple nodded to Craddock. "Inspector, any news on the teapot?" He sighed. "Clean as a whistle. Miss Marple no poison." The Cyanide was in the teacup, mixed with the tea, and the letter's ink matches a pen in the study, but Thomas still swears it's not his writing. Miss Marple's lips pursed, and the chemist's receipt from Harrington's. "We're checking," Craddock said. "It's for a chemical, but not cyanide. Could be harmless or not." She glanced at Mrs. Ellis, who was wiping a counter. "Mrs. Ellis, you were in the kitchen at 8, you said." Mrs. Ellis nodded, her eyes steady. "Yes, Miss, preparing trays for the party, but nobody saw you," Miss Marple said gently. "Not even the other maids." Mrs. Ellis's hands paused. "They were busy, miss. I was alone." Miss Marple smiled, but her mind was sharp. Alone meant no witnesses. She thought of Mrs. Lane again, whose kitchen alibi fell apart when a neighbor saw her elsewhere. Mrs. Ellis's calm was like a mask, hiding something. Clara approached, her voice shaky. "Miss Marple, I remembered something. That night, I saw a shadow by the study window. Someone moving outside, quick-like." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "When was this, dear?" "Just before 8, Clara said. "I was in the garden, getting air. I didn't think much of it then, but now." Miss Marple nodded. Clara's story was late, like a stitch added after the pattern was set. She thought of Lily, who'd invented a stranger to shift blame. Was Clara hiding her own steps? Dr. Grayson joined them, his glasses glinting. "A shadow could be anyone," he said. "The garden was full of guests. But cyanide takes planning. Someone knew Mr. Harrow's habits." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, "like his tea, at 8, strong with sugar." She glanced at Mrs. Ellis, who was now polishing a tray, her face blank. Dr. Grayson's knowledge was sharp, but his hands shook slightly. Miss Marple filed it away, like a note in her mind. She asked Craddock to see the study again. Inside, she studied the window. The torn curtain was snagged on a nail, the latch loose. Someone could have slipped in or out. She looked at the desk, where the chemist's receipt still lay. "Harrington's, London, dated last week." "Not cyanide," Craddock said. "But what?" She thought of a village chemist who'd sold a harmless powder that wasn't. Small clues told big stories. Back in the hall, she watched the suspects. Mrs. Ellis moved silently, her calm unnatural. Clara's eyes darted, her shawl tight around her shoulders. Dr. Grayson talked to Craddock, his voice loud but his hands nervous. Thomas wasn't there, but his shaky alibi lingered. Miss Marple's mind turned, drawing parallels to old village tales. Mrs. Lane's lie, Lily's shadow, Mr. Jenkins's greed-all, echoed here. The murderer was clever, using a forged letter and a shadow story to hide their tracks. But tracks were never fully covered. Mrs. Bantry tugged her arm. "Jane, you're thinking hard. Is it Mrs. Ellis? Her kitchen story's a lie." Miss Moore smiled. "It's a thread, Dolly. Like Clara's shadow, or Dr. Grayson's powders. They're all part of the pattern." They walked back to the village, the sun setting behind them. Miss Marple thought of the teacup, the curtain, the receipt. Each was a piece of the puzzle. The murderer had planned their crime, thinking the chaos of the party would hide it. They'd forged a letter, maybe climbed through a window, and poured poison with a steady hand. But Miss Marple saw the cracks, the empty kitchen, the late shadow, the nervous glances dotted home. She sat by her fire, her knitting untouched. The village was quiet, but danger hid in its corners. The murderer thought they'd won, with their clever alibis and tricks. But Miss Marple's eyes were sharper than they knew. She'd seen Mrs. Lane's lie unravel, Lily's story break, Jenkins's greed exposed. This would be no different tomorrow. She'd ask Sally about that argument between Mrs. Ellis and Mr. Harrow. She'd check on that receipt through Mrs. Bantry's London friends. The truth was like a hidden stitch, one pull, and the whole lie would come apart. Chapter 7. The Hidden Motive. The evening shadows stretched long across St. Mary Mead, painting the village in soft purples and grays. The cottages glowed with lamplight, and the air smelled of wood smoke and roses. But the quiet hid a restless buzz. Mr. Harrow's murder was all anyone could talk about. Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlor, her knitting needles still, her sharp blue eyes fixed on the fire. The pink scarf for her niece's baby lay untouched in its basket. Her mind was busy, weaving together clues from Willow Manor, the greasy teacup stain, the forged letter blaming Thomas, the torn curtain, the chemist's receipt, and the crumbling alibis. Someone had poisoned Mr. Harrow, thinking they'd outsmarted everyone. But Miss Marple knew lies were like loose threads one tug, and they unraveled. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. It was Mrs. Bantry, her hat feathers drooping, her face alight with news. "Jane, you must hear this," she said, bustling in. "My cousin in London sent a letter about Mr. Harrow. He was mixed up in some shady business. Years ago cheated people out of money. And Sally says Mrs. Ellis was seen at the post office, mailing something odd the day before the murder. Oh, it's all so thrilling." Miss Marple poured tea, her eyes twinkling. "Sit, Dolly. Shady business, you say? And Mrs. Ellis at the post office, that's worth knowing." Mrs. Bantry plopped into a chair, fanning herself. "My cousin says Mr. Harrow ran a scheme in London, selling fake stocks. Made enemies, lost friends. One woman, Ellen Carter, lost everything and vanished. And Sally says Mrs. Ellis mailed a small package, wrapped tight, to London. What could it be?" Miss Marple's lips pursed. A cheated woman and a mysterious package were strong threads. She thought of old Mr. Jenkins, who'd swindled a neighbor and paid for it with a broken window, and worse. "Ellen Carter," she said softly. "Does your cousin know what happened to her?" Mrs. Bantry shook her head. "Gone, like a ghost. Nobody's seen her in years." Miss Marple nodded, her mind ticking. Mrs. Ellis's calm face flashed in her thoughts. The housekeeper knew Mr. Harrow's habits, poured his tea, and had no one to vouch for her in the kitchen at 8. And now, a package to London. She remembered a village woman, Mrs. Cole, who'd mailed stolen goods to hide her crime. Small acts hid big secrets. "Let's visit the post office tomorrow," Miss Marple said. "And the tea shop. Sally hears everything." Mrs. Bantry grinned. "You're on the scent, Jane. I'll come with you." As Mrs. Bantry left, Miss Marple sat by the fire, thinking. Mr. Harrow's past was a new clue. A man who cheated others made enemies, and enemies held grudges. She thought of the forged letter, pointing at Thomas. It was too neat, like a signpost, meant to mislead. Mrs. Ellis's package could be nothing or everything. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The murderer was clever, but clever people tripped over their own tricks. The next morning, Miss Marple and Mrs. Bantry walked to the post office, a small brick building by the village square. Mrs. Price, the postmistress, was sorting letters, her glasses perched on her nose. She smiled when she saw them. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bent, hear about the murder. I bet everyone's talking." Miss Marple nodded, her smile gentle. "Mrs. Price, did Mrs. Ellis mail something recently? A package, perhaps?" Mrs. Price's eyes widened. "Funny you ask. Day before the party, she brought a small parcel, wrapped in brown paper. Said it was for a friend in London. Looked heavy, like it held something solid. I sent it off, but it stuck in my mind. She was so quiet about it." Miss Marple's mind ticked. "Did she say who it was for?" "No," Mrs. Price said. "Just an address in London. I can't recall it exactly, but I wrote it in the log. Want me to check?" "Please," Miss Marple said. Mrs. Price flipped through a ledger, then pointed. "Here 12 Willow Lane, London. No name, just the address." Miss Marple thanked her, filing the address away. A package with no name was curious, like a letter without a signature. She thought of Mrs. Cole again, who'd mailed a stolen ring to a secret buyer. Was Mrs. Ellis hiding something, or sending it away? At the Blue Kettle, the tea shop was busy, the air thick with the smell of fresh scones. Sally greeted them, her apron dusted with flour. Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry, everyone still talking about Mr. Harrow. Clara was here, crying again. Says she's scared, someone's following her. Miss Marple took her corner seat. "Thank you, Sally. Did you hear more about Mrs. Ellis's argument with Mr. Harrow?" Sally nodded, leaning in. "Molly says it was last week, in the Manors. Kitchen Mrs. Ellis was shouting, saying Mr. Harrow owed her money from years ago. He laughed, called it nonsense. She stormed out, face like thunder. Miss Marple crumbled a biscuit, her eyes sharp. An old debt was a strong motive. She thought of Ellen Carter, the woman Mr. Harrow cheated. Could Mrs. Ellis be connected? She remembered a village man, Mr. Tate, who'd poisoned a rival over a debt, thinking nobody would guess. But Miss Marple had guessed, and she was guessing now. Mrs. Bantry gasped. "Jane, you think Mrs. Ellis did it? Over money?" "It's possible," Miss Marple said. "But we need more. Dolly, can your cousin check that London address? Willow Lane. It might lead somewhere." Mrs. Bantry nodded, scribbling a note. "I'll write to her today." "Oh, Jane, you're like a detective." Miss Marple smiled. "Just an old lady who notices things." "Dolly." As they sipped tea, Inspector Craddock walked in, his face tired but sharp. He spotted Miss Marple and joined them, his notebook out. "Miss Marple, you're always where the news is. We've got something new. The chemist's receipt from Harrington's for a cleaning chemical, not poison. But it's odd Mr. Harrow didn't clean his own house." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Mrs. Ellis might have bought it. Inspector, she keeps the manor tidy." Craddock nodded. "We're checking. And the letter's not Thomas's. We compared it to his notes. Someone faked it." Miss Marple's lips pursed. "A forged letter, a clean teapot, a mysterious package. Someone's working hard to hide their tracks." Craddock leaned in. "You've got a theory, haven't you?" "Not yet," she said. "But I'm thinking of a woman in the village. Years ago, Mrs. Cole, she mailed stolen goods to throw off suspicion and forged a note to blame someone else. It's an old trick, but it works until someone looks closely." Craddock jotted a note. "I'll check on Mrs. Ellis. Nobody saw her in the kitchen. And now this package. And Clara's shadow story, nobody else saw a thing outside that window." Miss Marple nodded. Clara's shadow was late, like a story made up to shift blame. Mrs. Ellis's package and argument pointed to a grudge. Dr. Grayson's powders and Thomas's temper were still in the mix. But Mrs. Ellis's calm was too perfect, like a polished mirror hiding cracks. They left the tea shop and walked to Willow Manor. The hall was quiet, the air heavy. Mrs. Ellis was dusting a vase, her hand steady. Clara sat by a window, her shawl tight around her. Dr. Grayson was in the study, talking to a policeman about the teacup. Miss Marple watched them all, her mind stitching clues together. She approached Mrs. Ellis, her voice gentle. "Mrs. Ellis, you worked hard for Mr. Harrow. Did he treat you well?" Mrs. Ellis's eyes flicked up, then down. "He paid on time." Miss kept to himself. "I did my job." "Did you ever know him before St. Mary Mead?" Miss Marple asked. "In London, perhaps." Mrs. Ellis's hands paused, just for a moment. "No, miss. I met him when he hired me." Miss Marple smiled, but her eyes were sharp. That pause was a crack, like a dropped stitch. She thought of Ellen Carter, cheated by Mr. Harrow. Was Mrs. Ellis Ellen? Or someone close? The package to London, the argument about money, it all fit, like pieces in a quilt. In the study, Miss Marple looked at the window again. The torn curtain and loose latch hadn't moved. She pictured someone slipping through, pouring poison, planting the letter. Mrs. Ellis knew the manor's ways, but Clara's shadow story nagged, and Dr. Grayson's powders lingered in her thoughts. Thomas's temper was still a thread, though the forged letter weakened his guilt. Mrs. Bantry tugged her arm. "Jane," Mrs. Ellis looked nervous. "When you asked about London, you're on to something." Miss Marple nodded. "A motive's hiding, Dolly. Money, betrayal, load wounds, fester, like Mrs. Cole, who never forgave a debt." As they walked home, the village was settling into dusk. Miss Marple thought of the package, the argument, the receipt. Mrs. Ellis was at the center, but Clara's fear and Dr. Grayson's nerves were loose ends. The murderer thought their disguise was perfect: forged letter, clean teapot, hidden grudge. But Miss Marple saw the cracks. Tomorrow, she'd wait for Mrs. Bantry's cousin to check that London address. She'd talk to Sally again, digging for more on Mrs. Ellis's past. The truth was close, like a pattern almost complete. One more tug, and the motive would show. Chapter 8. A trap is set. The morning sun peeked through the curtains of St. Mary Mead. casting soft light on the village's neat cottages and blooming gardens. The air smelled of fresh grass and baking bread, but a nervous hum lingered. Miss Harrow's murder was still the talk of every doorstep. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cozy parlor, her knitting needles quiet, her sharp blue eyes fixed on the fire. The pink scarf for her niece's baby lay untouched in its basket. Her mind was busy, weaving clues from Willow Manor, the greasy teacup stain, the forged letter blaming Thomas, the torn curtain, the chemist's receipt, the mysterious package Mrs. Ellis mailed, and her argument with Mr. Harrow about money. Someone thought they'd fooled everyone with their clever tricks. But Miss Marple knew lies were like cobwebs, pretty until you brushed them away. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. It was Mrs. Bantry, her hat slightly tilted, her face bright with news. "Jane, you won't believe it," she said, bustling in. "My cousin in London wrote back about that address. Well, Willow Lane. It's a boarding house. And a woman named Ellen Carter lived there years ago, but she's gone now. And Sally says Mrs. Ellis was at the tea shop, whispering about leaving the village soon. Oh, Jane, it's all so suspicious." Miss Marple poured tea, her eyes twinkling. "Sit, Dolly. Ellen Carter again, and Mrs. Ellis planning to leave. That's a strong thread." Mrs. Bantry plopped into a chair, fanning herself. "My cousin says Ellen Carter was ruined by Mr. Harrow's fake stalk scheme. She vanished after threatening him in a letter. Could Mrs. Ellis be her? And why's she leaving now?" Miss Marple's lips pursed. A cheated woman, a threatening letter, a package to Whodunit, all pointed to Mrs. Ellis. She thought of Mrs. Cole, the village woman who'd mailed stolen goods to cover her tracks, thinking she'd escape. But Miss Marple had caught her, and she'd catch this murderer too. "We need to shake things up, Dolly," she said. "A trap might make the truth slip out." Mrs. Bantry's eyes widened. "A trap, like in a detective story." "Exactly," Miss Marple said. "People hide lies until they're scared. Then they make mistakes." She thought of a village boy, Tom, who'd stolen apples and stayed quiet until a fake witness made him confess. A trap worked by rattling the guilty, and Miss Marple had an idea. "Let's talk to Inspector Craddock," she said. "We'll gather everyone at the manor and say new evidence has turned up. The murderer will panic and slip." Mrs. Bant clapped her hands. "Oh, Jane, you're clever. I'll call Craddock right away." By noon, they were at Willow Manor, the hall filled with tense faces. Inspector Craddock had agreed to Miss Marple's plan, though his eyes were skeptical. Mrs. Ellis stood by the fireplace, dusting a vase, her face blank. Clara sat on a sofa, twisting her shawl, her eyes red. Thomas slouched by a window, his hands in his pockets. Dr. Grayson paced, his glasses glinting, muttering about cyanide. The air was thick, like a storm waiting to break. Craddock cleared his throat. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice loud. "We've found new evidence in Mr. Harrow's murder. A witness saw someone near the study window at 8, carrying a small bottle. We're close to an arrest." Miss Marple watched the room. Clara gasped, her hands shaking. Thomas's eyes narrowed, his jaw tight. Dr. Grayson stopped pacing, his face pale. Mrs. Ellis's dusting slowed, her fingers gripping the cloth. Someone was nervous, Miss Marple thought. But who? Clara spoke first, her voice thin. "A bottle. I saw a shadow, like I said, but no bottle. I swear I was in the garden, not the study." Thomas snorted. "Sounds like someone's trying to pin it on me again. I was at the pub, not sneaking around with bottles." Dr. Grayson adjusted his glasses. "A bottle could be anything, medicine, not poison. You're sure it's cyanide?" Mrs. Ellis said nothing, her eyes fixed on the vase. Miss Marple noted her silence, like a dropped stitch in a pattern. She remembered Mrs. Cole, who'd stayed quiet when accused, only to slip up later. Silence was a shield, but it could crack. Craddock raised a hand. "We're testing the bottle's contents, and we've traced that chemist's receipt from Harrington's. It's for a chemical used in cleaning, but it can be mixed to make poison. Someone here knows more than they're saying." Miss Marple's eyes flicked to Mrs. Ellis. The receipt was for cleaning, but poison could hide in plain sight. She thought of a village chemist who'd sold a harmless powder that killed Mrs. Ellis's package to London. Her argument about money, her link to Ellen Carter, all fit. She stepped forward, her voice gentle. "Mrs. Ellis, you mailed a package to London, didn't you? To 12 Willow Lane, the day before Mr. Harrow died." Mrs. Ellis's hands froze, her face blank but her eyes sharp. "Just a gift, miss, for a friend. No name on it," Miss Marple said. "Odd for a gift. And you argued with Mr. Harrow about money, I hear. An old debt, perhaps." The room went quiet. Clara stared, her shawl slipping. Thomas's eyes widened. Dr. Grayson coughed, his hands fidgety. Mrs. Ellis's lips tightened. "I don't know what you mean, miss. I did my job." Miss Marple smiled. "Of course, but Mr. Harrow had enemies. A woman named Ellen Carter, cheated in London. You never met her, you said." "Never," Mrs. Ellis said, her voice flat. But her hand shook, just for a moment. Miss Marple filed it away. That shake was a crack, like a tear in a seam. She thought of Ellen Carter, ruined by Mr. Harrow, and Mrs. Ellis's calm mask. The package, the argument, the empty kitchen alibi, it all pointed to her. But Clara's shadow story and Dr. Grayson's powder still nagged. Thomas's temper was a loose thread too. Craddock spoke again. "We're checking that London address. And the teacups, Stanets, not just cyanide. There's a trace of oil, like from a cleaning chemical. Whoever poured that tea knew what they were doing." Miss Marple watched Mrs. Ellis. Her face stayed blank, but her eyes darted to the kitchen door. A mistake, Miss Marple thought. She remembered Mrs. Cole, who'd panicked when a fake clue was mentioned, dropping a stolen ring in her haste. The trap was working. As the group broke apart, Mrs. Ellis hurried to the kitchen. Miss Marple followed, her steps quiet. In the kitchen, Mrs. Ellis was at the sink, scrubbing a tray, her hands quick. Miss Marple noticed a small bottle on the counter cleaning fluid. The label said, "Harrington's, London," the same as the receipt. "Careful work, Mrs. Ellis," Miss Marple said. "You like things clean." Mrs. Ellis nodded, not looking up. "Always." Miss Marple smiled, but her eyes were sharp. The bottle was new, but the receipt was old. Had Mrs. Ellis bought it for cleaning or for poison? She thought of the teacup's oily stain. A drop of chemical, mixed with cyanide, could have been slipped into the tea. Back in the hall, Clara was crying, telling Craddock she was scared. "I didn't do it," she said. "That shadow, it was real. Someone was out there." Dr. Grayson patted her shoulder. "Calm down, Clara. Shadows are nothing, but poison, that takes skill." Miss Marple watched him. His voice was kind, but his hands were nervous. She thought of his headache powders, his knowledge of cyanide. Was he too eager to help? Thomas approached, his face red. "This is nonsense. That letter's a fake, and I wasn't near the study." "Check the pub again." Craddock nodded. "We're checking, lad, but your walk by the manor at 8 doesn't help." Miss Marple's mind ticked. The trap had shaken them. Mrs. Ellis' darting eyes, Clara's tears, Dr. Grayson's nerves, Thomas's anger. Someone was hiding a motive, and Mrs. Ellis was the strongest thread. Her link to Ellen Carter, her package, her steady hands pouring tea, all pointed to revenge. Mrs. Bantry tugged her arm. "Jane, Mrs. Ellis nearly dropped that tray when you mentioned the package. You've rattled her." Miss Marple nodded. "She's hiding something, Dolly, like Mrs. Cole, who thought she'd fooled everyone. But the truth slips out." As they left the manor, the village was settling into evening. Miss Marple thought of the bottle, the package, the argument. Mrs. Ellis was at the heart, but Clara's shadow and Dr. Grayson's powders were loose ends. Thomas's alibi was weak, but the letter was alive. The trap had worked. Someone was nervous. Miss Marple would watch, listen, and wait. The murderer thought they'd won, with their forged letter and hidden motive. But Miss Marple's eyes saw the cracks. Tomorrow, she'd ask Sally about Mrs. Ellis's whispers of leaving. She'd wait for Craddock's news on that London address. The truth was close, like a knot ready to untie. Chapter 9. The Unraveling. The morning light crept over St. Mary Mead. painting the village's cottages in soft pinks and golds. Birds sang, and the air smelled of dew and fresh bread from the bakery. But a heavy cloud hung over the village. Mr. Harrow's murder was still unsolved, and whispers of poison and betrayal filled every corner. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cozy parlor, her knitting needles still, her sharp blue eyes fixed on the garden. The pink scarf for her niece's baby lay untouched in its basket. Her mind was busy, stitching together clues from Willow Manor, the greasy teacup stain, the forged letter blaming Thomas, the torn curtain, the chemist's receipt, Mrs. Ellis's mysterious package, and her argument about money. The trap at the manor had shaken. Someone Mrs. Ellis's eyes had darted. Her hands trembled. Miss Marple knew the murderer thought they'd fooled everyone. But lies were like loose stitches one pull, and they came apart. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. It was Mrs. Bantry, her hat askew, her face bright with news. "Jane, you must come quick," she said, bustling in. "Inspector Craddock's at the manor with news from London about that addressed Willow Lane. And Sally says Mrs. Ellis was at the tea shop last night, packing a bag to leave. Oh, Jane, we're close, aren't we?" Miss Marple poured tea, her eyes twinkling. "Sit, Dolly. Mrs. Ellis packing, and news from London. That's a thread worth pulling." Mrs. Bantry plopped into a chair, fanning herself. Craddock's cousin checked the address. "It's a boarding house, like you thought. Ellen Carter lived there after Mr. Harrow cheated her, but she left years ago. The package Mrs. Ellis sent went to a woman named Mary Stone. Nobody knows her. And Sally says Mrs. Ellis was whispering about catching a train tonight." Miss Marple's lips pursed. A package to a stranger, a plan to flee it all, pointed to Mrs. Ellis. She thought of Mrs. Cole, the village woman who'd tried to run after stealing, caught when her bag held the evidence. "Mary Stone," Miss Marple said softly. "Maybe a friend or a new name for an old face. We need to see Craddock." They walked to Willow Manor, the village buzzing with gossip. By the duck pond, children whispered about a poison lady. At the butcher's, Mr. Green muttered about Mrs. Ellis's odd errands. Miss Marple listened, her ears sharp. Gossip was like a breeze, carrying bits of truth. At the manor, the hall was quiet, the air heavy. Inspector Craddock stood by the fireplace, his notebook full. Mrs. Ellis was in the kitchen, washing dishes, her face blank. Clara sat on a sofa, twisting her shawl, her eyes red. Thomas leaned against a wall, his scowl deep. Dr. Grayson was there, adjusting his glasses, offering Craddock more facts about cyanide. Miss Marple watched them all, her mind like a needle threading clues. Craddock spotted her. "Miss Marple, you're just in time. The London addressed Willow Lane got a package from Mrs. Ellis, addressed to Mary Stone, but no such person lives there now, and the chemist's receipt. It's for a chemical that can mix with cyanide to hide its taste. Found traces in the teacup's stain." Miss Marple nodded. "And Mrs. Ellis's handwriting. Inspector, did you check it against a letter blaming Thomas?" Craddock's eyes widened. "We did. It's close, very close. The pen's from the manor, and the ink matches. She's got no alibi for 8 o'clock either." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "A letter, a package, a chemical. Small things, but they tell a story." Mrs. Bantry gasped. "Jane, you think it's her? Mrs. Ellis?" Miss Marple didn't answer, but her mind was busy. She thought of Ellen Carter, cheated by Mr. Harrow, and Mrs. Ellis's argument about money. The package to a fake name, the plan to leave it, was a pattern, like a quilt coming together. She remembered Mrs. Cole, whose calm face hid a thief, heart caught when her lies didn't match her actions. "Let's gather everyone," Miss Marple said to Craddock. "One more talk might unravel this." Craddock nodded, calling the suspects to the hall. Mrs. Ellis came from the kitchen, her hands damp from washing. Clara looked up, her face pale. Thomas straightened, his eyes wary. Dr. Grayson stopped pacing, his hands fidgety. The air was thick, like before a storm. Craddock spoke first. "We've got new evidence. The teacup stain had a chemical mixed with cyanide, bought from Harrington's in London. The letter blaming Thomas was written with a manor pen, and a package was sent to a fake name in London the day before the murder." Miss Marple watched their faces. Clara's eyes widened, her shawl slipping. Thomas clenched his fists, muttering about tricks. Dr. Grayson coughed, his glasses slipping. Mrs. Ellis stood still, her face blank, but her eyes darted to the door. Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Mrs. Ellis, you poured Mr. Harrow's tea that night, didn't you? Strong, with sugar, in a special cup." Mrs. Ellis nodded, her voice flat. "Yes, Miss, like always." "And you mailed a package to London," Miss Marple said, "to 12 Willow Lane, where Ellen Carter once lived. A woman Mr. Harrow cheated years ago." Mrs. Ellis's hands twitched, just for a moment. "I told you, it was a gift." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes sharp. "A gift with no name. And you argued with Mr. Harrow about money, an old debt, perhaps, from when he called himself a businessman in London." The room went quiet. Clara gasped. Thomas stared. Dr. Grayson froze. Mrs. Ellis's face stayed blank, but her eyes were like trapped birds. "I don't know what you mean," Mrs. Ellis said, her voice tight. Miss Marple's voice softened. "I think you do. Ellen Carter lost everything to Mr. Harrow's scheme. She disappeared, but grudges don't. You knew his tea routine, poured it yourself. The teacup had a chemical to hide the poison's taste, and the letter blaming Thomas Shue. Handwriting's close, isn't it? Like the lists you write for the grocer." Mrs. Ellis's hands shook, her mask cracking. "You've got no proof. I was in the kitchen. Nobody saw you," Miss Marple said. "And the package you hydro. What was in it? Something you didn't want found." Mrs. Ellis's face turned white. "You're wrong. I didn't. You hated him," Miss Marple said gently. "He ruined you, or someone close. Ellen Carter, perhaps. You waited, planned, and struck. The letter was a clever touch, but the ink gave you away." Mrs. Ellis dropped her cloth, her voice breaking. "He deserved it. He cheated me and Carter, my sister. Took our savings, left us with nothing. I changed my name, followed him here, and made him pay." The hall was silent. Clara sobbed. Thomas gaped. Dr. Grayson stared. Craddock stepped forward, his face grim. "Mrs. Ellis, you're coming with me." Mrs. Ellis's shoulders slumped, her eyes wet. "I thought I'd fooled you all," she whispered. "But you, old lady, you saw." Miss Marple nodded, her heart heavy. "People always leave traces, Mrs. Ellis." Craddock led her away, the handcuffs clicking. Mrs. Bantry clutched Miss Marple's arm. "Jane, you did it. How did you know?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "The teacup stain, the letters ink, her steady hands. Small things, Dolly, but they speak." Clara approached, her voice shaky. I wasn't sure, but I suspected. That's why I was scared." Thomas muttered. "I didn't like him, but I didn't kill him." "Thank you, Miss Marple." Dr. Grayson adjusted his glasses. "Remarkable, Miss Marple. Your eye for detail." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gentle. The trap had worked, and the truth was out. As she walked home with Mrs. Bantry, the village felt lighter, the shadows gone. She thought of Mrs. Ellis, driven by pain, and Ellen Carter's loss. Revenge was a heavy weight, and lies were heavier. Miss Marple had seen it before, in village tales of greed and betrayal. The murderer thought they'd won, but her sharp eyes saw the truth dot. At home, she sat by her fire, picking up her knitting. The pink scarf grew, stitch by stitch. The village was safe again, but Miss Marple knew more. Secrets waited. She'd be ready, with her needles and her eyes, to unravel them. Chapter 10. Justice and Reflection. The sun rose gently over St. Mary Mead, washing the village in a soft, golden light. The cottages sparkled, their gardens bursting with roses and daisies. The church bell chimed, and the air smelled of fresh bread from Mrs. Baker's shop. The buzz of Mr. Harrow's murder had quieted, replaced by a calm that felt like a sigh. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cozy parlor, her knitting needles clicking softly for the first time in days. The pink scarf for her niece's baby grew longer, stitch by stitch, its soft wool a comfort in her hands. Her sharp blue eyes gazed out the window, but her mind was still on Willow Manor, where Mrs. Ellis's confession had unraveled the mystery. The murderer had thought they'd fooled everyone. But Miss Marple's quiet ways had caught them, as they always did. She sipped her tea, thinking over the case. The greasy teacup stain, the forged letter blaming Thomas, the torn curtain, the chemist's receipt, the package to London, and Mrs. Ellis's hidden grudge, all fit, like a quilt sewn tight. Mrs. Ellis, once Ellen Carter's sister, had carried a wound from Mr. Harrow's cheating ways. She'd planned her revenge, pouring poison in his tea, planting a letter to frame Thomas, and mailing evidence away to hide her tracks. But small things, her steady hands, the ink on the letter, a pause when questioned had given her away. Miss Marple knew people's lies were like dropped stitches, easy to spot if you looked closely. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. It was Mrs. Bantry, her hat straight for once, her face bright with relief. "Jane, the village is talking about you," she said, bustling in. "Mrs. Ellis locked away, and everyone's safe again thanks to you." "Oh, you're a marvel." Miss Marple smiled, pouring tea. "Sit, Dally, it was just noticing things. That's all. People talk, and clues slip out." Mrs. Bantry plopped into a chair, her eyes wide. "But how did you know it was Mrs. Ellis?" "I thought Thomas was guilty, or maybe Clara." "You saw right through it." Miss Marple's needles clicked. "It was the little things, Dolly. The teacup stain had oil from that cleaning chemical. The letter's ink matched Mrs. Ellis's grocery lists. Her package to London, her argument about money all pointed to a grudge. I thought of Ellen Carter, cheated by Mr. Harrow, and Mrs. Ellis's pause when I asked about London. Lies don't hold up when you tug. Double quotes. Mrs. Bantry sipped her tea, shaking her head. "You're like a detective in a book, Jane. Clara's so relieved she came by the manor, thanking me for your help. And Thomas, he's back at the pub, saying you saved him. Even Dr. Grayson's quiet now, no more talk of poisons." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gentle. Clara's tears had been fear, not guilt. Thomas's temper was real, but the letter was a lie. Dr. Grayson's knowledge was just that, knowledge, not a crime. She thought of a village girl, Lily, years ago, who'd cried to hide a theft, and Mrs. Cole, who'd mailed stolen goods to escape. People's hearts were messy, full of pain or greed. But their actions left traces. Mrs. Ellis's hate had burned too bright, and her careful plan had crumbled under Miss Marple's sharp eyes. "I feel for her, Dolly," Miss Marple said softly. "Ellen Carter's loss broke her sister's heart. Revenge seemed sweet, but it only brought more pain." Mrs. Bantry sighed. "You're too kind, Jane. She killed a man. But I suppose you're right, hate makes people do awful things." Miss Marple's needles paused. "It does. Like old Mr. Jenkins, who cheated a friend and lost everything. Or Mrs. Finch, who poisoned her husband over a grudge. People think they can hide their hearts, but they can't." They sat in silence, the fire crackling. Outside, St. Mary Mead was waking up. Children laughed by the duck pond, and Mr. Green swept his shop's steps. The village felt safe again, its rhythm back to normal. But Miss Marple knew peace was fragile. Secrets always hid in quiet corners. Mrs. Bantry stood, adjusting her hat. "I'm off to the tea shop. Jane sallies, baking a cake to celebrate. Says you're the hero of St. Mary Mead. Will you come?" Miss Marple smiled. "Maybe later, Dolly. I've got knitting to finish." As Mrs. Bantry left, Miss Marple picked up her needles, the pink scarf growing longer. She thought of the Manor's Hall, where Mrs. Ellis's confession had stunned everyone. The trap had worked. Mentioning a fake bottle had rattled her. And Miss Marple's questions about Ellen Carter had broken her calm. The teacup's oily stain, the letter's ink, the package to a fake name, the package to her. Miss Marple had seen it before, in village tales of betrayal and lies. People thought they were clever, but their arrogance was their downfall. Glanced out the window. Clara was walking by, her shawl loose, her face calm for the first time. Thomas was at the pub, his name cleared. Dr. Grayson was back at his clinic, his nervous hands still. The village had healed, but Miss Marple knew Mrs. Ellis's story would linger, a warning of what hate could do. She thought of the clues that had solved it. The teacup, with its faint oil stain, had shown the poison's trick. The letter, written in Mrs. Ellis's hand, had been too perfect to be true. The torn curtain hinted at a sneaky exit. Though Mrs. Ellis hadn't needed it, she'd walked boldly through the kitchen, pouring death in a cup. The chemist's receipt for a chemical that hid cyanide's taste had sealed her guilt, and the package to London, sent to a ghost named Mary Stone, was her attempt to hide evidence. Maybe the vial, maybe papers proving her past. Miss Marple's needles clicked, steady as her thoughts. She remembered Mrs. Cole, who'd thought a mailed package would save her, and Mrs. Lane, whose kitchen lie had crumbled. People repeated the same mistakes, driven by the same feelings: greed, anger, pain. Mrs. Ellis had carried her sister's pain, letting it twist her heart until murder seemed right. But justice was like a needle, it stitched things back together. A soft breeze carried voices from the street. Sally was laughing with a customer, saying the tea shop was busy again. The village was moving on, its heart beating strong. Miss Marple smiled, her eyes soft but sharp. St. Mary Mead was her home, and she knew it was its kindness, its gossip, its secrets. She'd seen them all, from stolen rings to broken hearts, and she'd always found the truth. The fire popped, and she thought of Mrs. Ellis, now in a cell, her calm mask gone. She'd thought she'd fooled everyone with her forged letter and careful plan. But Miss Marple's quiet eyes had seen through it, catching the small things others missed. The murderer's arrogance had been her undoing, like so many before. Miss Marple stood, stretching her hands. The scarf was nearly done, its pink wool bright and warm. She'd finish it tomorrow, maybe send it with a note to her niece. For now, she walked to the window, looking out at the village. The sun was high, the sky clear. Clara and Thomas were free, their lives mended. Dr. Grayson was back to his patients, his nervous talk forgotten. The manor stood quiet, waiting for a new owner. She thought of her garden, where roses bloomed despite the weeds. People were like that, full of beauty and flaws. Their stories tangled but true. Mrs. Ellis had chosen hate, and it had trapped her. Miss Marple chose to watch, to listen, to help. It was her way, and it had brought peace again. As she turned back to her knitting, a knock came again. It was Sally, holding a small cake wrapped in paper. "Miss Marple, this is for you," she said, her cheeks pink. "Everyone says you saved the village." Miss Marple smiled, taking the cake. "Thank you, dear. It was just a matter of looking closely." Sally grinned and ran off, her apron flapping. Miss Marple set the cake on the table, its sweet smell filling the room. She picked up her needles, the scarf growing under her fingers. The village was safe, its secrets laid bare. But Miss Marple knew more would come: new faces, new stories, new lies. She'd be ready, with her knitting and her sharp eyes, to unravel them. The fire glowed, and the scarf grew longer. St. Mary Mead was quiet, its heart whole again. Miss Marple's needles clicked, a soft rhythm in the stillness. Justice was done, and she was satisfied.